okay? Could you say something, Sophia?
Hello, hi.
Okay, great, fantastic. We're having a conversation and you are joining us. I'm with Sophia Ndaba. And Sophia, if you've already read my review of the Sydney Dance Company's New Breed, recent 2022, then you will know that Sophia is a choreographer I'm very excited about, and that is why I wanted to see New Breed. And that's what we're talking about, and amongst other things. How are you feeling after it all?
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm feeling well rested now. I have to say, it was a really intense process and one that I'm so proud of and glad that I did. But I definitely needed a few weeks after to relax and come back, and now I feel really good.
Tell me about the choreography process. Now, we talk about inspiration, etc., and that you had an introduction before your piece to talk about what it is that inspired you. But what is it that starts off that spark? What ignites that, and you go, I want to do something around a concept of. But before the concept, there's the thought, right?
Yeah.
So what is the thought?
I mean, I get inspired by so many different things, and generally when I make dance, I like to look at the human experience from a very universal and broad perspective. But around about the time that I was aware I was going to do New Breed was when I moved to the Central Coast.
Right.
So I was immersed in nature and often, going for walks on the beach and looking out and being inspired by landscape and seeing where different parts of landscape intersect. So like the sky meeting the horizon and the sea.
Beautiful.
Or
right.
The water and then the edge of the water and the sand. Or even, the edge of trees as they cut across a landscape. And
wow.
So these seams in nature showed me that you can find the definition and the separation of things, but it's still all part of the one. And so then I got thinking, I think that was definitely the first visual inspiration that I got.
Was certainly very visual, the piece. I love the veil, the physical, the actual literal veil of separation.
Yeah.
And for me, watching it, I really felt out of all the pieces, and I have said this in my review, yours is the piece that I feel really connected with the zeitgeist, what is actually happening, what people are feeling, that there is... I felt like a real evolution was happening on stage, like skin cells or cells, not skin cells, but cells are all of a sudden coming to life. Is that what did you hope for the viewer to interpret from that?
Yeah.
Before we get into what you wanted to project, what did you want the viewer to take from?
I
member.
Love that you can even articulate that in your experience. That makes me feel so happy.
Oh, good.
And that in a way I did my job.
Right.
Because I definitely wanted the audience to feel and feel before thinking, if possible.
Yeah.
And that images help us to really access these ideas. And so, I looked at the micro and the macro, the macro and the micro.
Yeah.
And so we did look at cell splitting. We looked at the process of mitosis. We looked at fission and fusion, which on a atomic level is the separation and the smashing together of atoms.
Oh gosh, absolutely. Absolutely that happened.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you could see that. But at the same time, I wanted to give a sense of story. So although I'm working with concepts and ideas that, are scientific but also spiritual in a way, I still worked with the bodies in the space to create relationship and story between them, and also some sense of a journey from the beginning, middle and end of the piece. So you felt that a world opened up in the beginning and then led you in and then resolved in some kind of way.
It was evolution we were watching. It was just absolutely, it had that wonderful classic piece of the rising, the crescendo, and then all that and the climax. It was spectacular.
Yeah.
So is this your first piece that you've choreographed? Or?
Of this nature, yes, but I spent about 5 years living in Berlin before the pandemic.
Right.
And at that time I was still really focused on my career as a performer, so working a lot for other people. But I was commissioned by a theatre in Berlin called Bauhaus Neunenstrasse, and they asked me to come in and make a solo. And they put it as a part of a festival that was focused on post-colonial perspectives. And so they really like to profile the work of mixed race artists.
Yep.
And to give them a platform to do work that kind of researches into the identity and perspectives around your own identity. So I made a short work that was a solo called The Highlight of the Shadow.
That's fantastic. We must show the audience that. And now, going back to identity. So we're at a time when identity politics, we're really embroiled in it. But as a person, biracial, how does it feel coming back into Australia? Because in terms of being biracial, I feel that multicultural, biracial people of color are less insular with their art. They show art that people totally resonate with, rather than pieces that are. I'm going to use the word indulgent, but I don't necessarily mean that in a selfish way. You can be indulgent. You can self-care is indulgent. Having fresh flowers every day is indulgent. But you wouldn't say that's selfish. It's just lovely indulgent.
Yeah.
But I feel that performers or artists of a multicultural background have an awareness of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Do you have to? Do you put that in your work? Do you, like you're talking about in Berlin, what happened, the solo,
I feel like I'm a very spiritual person, so regardless of being a choreographer or an artist, I'm on this quest of like understanding myself and my journey in the greater scheme of things anyway. So I put a lot of energy into that. And then there's the journey of being a choreographer. And I find that sometimes it's really awesome and necessary and important to make work that is reflecting self-identity, reflecting race, reflecting my experiences in the world as a mixed race person. And then sometimes it's not, and I don't know why. Sometimes I think it's because it's too sensitive, and sometimes I think I have a greater message.
That's right.
That encompasses all humans, and I think it just is a flux between those two. And so being back in Australia is interesting because I grew up here, so I had an experience of living as a mixed race person for a long time, then moved to Berlin, which has a completely different kind of ecosystem and a way of being, and then coming back I was able to observe such change, and also some things that are still the same.
Yeah, sure.
And so the changes are that on so many levels and systemic as well, like government funding, for example, profiles or is trying to create space for cultural diversity. So when you're applying for funding for an arts project, there are literal boxes to tick that create space for artists to have opportunities that are mixed race.
How do you feel about that? Do you think it's good and necessary for the time being? Or do you think sometimes that, as you said earlier, you want to be able to create pieces that aren't necessarily political? Because as a biracial, as a multicultural person, we are almost expected to be political with our art, instead of just being indulgent. I feel that the dominant race in today's society are able to create indulgent, pure pieces of art that, without it having to necessarily have a message. But I feel we're almost saying, well, we can't create art without the obligation of having a message behind it. So going back to all that government funding and stuff, do you think it's necessary right now because we need to actually get to a level of, equal opportunity?
Yeah.
And the only way to do it is to highlight the lack of it?
Yeah.
So,
I think that governments have a responsibility. People who are responsible for, the people that they're looking after have to show that they're looking after the people. And so previously where, and you can trace that all the way back to the reasons why, but we've been excluded. And so we have to see inclusion. And I agree with that. And I think that if that comes in the form of funding bodies creating gaps and opportunities and boxes for us to tick to show that, then do it. But I also think that from the ground up, we need to make our own space, and when we make our own space, we show and we tell what we want to do with it, because we have the right to. So we can make work that is about our identity and about our experience as mixed race people, but we can make work that resonates with us on a number of different levels because we have the freedom to. And so it needs to come from both, but I don't think that there's a problem with either or. I think it's all of it is necessary, rather than saying this, not that. It should be this and that, and that,
absolutely.
and that, until we're all inclusive and we're all included and we all have our own voice.
Yes, I guess that goes back to what we were talking about earlier before the recording, and that teens and 20s are just, you can't determine a person's personality from that. It's just free fall because you've got to push all boundaries in order to find out what is.
Yeah.
So right now it feels like the world is in its that adult, the teenage phase of just being shitty, and then, but we're trying to find this middle ground. All of a sudden people are like, well, okay, and that's perhaps where we're at. So let's go back to you as a child, as you as young. So tell me about you. Tell us about where it started. Where does the spark ignite? Where did you know? How did you know you wanted to be a dancer? Where did it start for you?
Yeah. To be a dancer came a little bit later. I actually wanted to be an actor.
Right.
And, my mum put me and my brother into a talent agency at a very young age, and we started doing TV commercials.
Wow.
And, and we were on TV shows. And then once I got to the age where I was going into high school, I auditioned for a performing arts high school called the MacDonald College.
Right. That's
in
right,
North Strathfield.
yeah.
And at that time was around the 2000 Olympic Games in Sydney,
right,
when Nikki Webster
right,
was one of
right,
the solo
yes,
performers.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, and she went to MacDonald College
Yes.
and did a 60 minutes interview on Channel 9, and that really put the school on the map.
Right.
Yeah, and so me and my mum were like, what's that? I want to go there. But it's a private school and it was very expensive. But I auditioned and I got a scholarship, which allowed me to go there. So yeah, I got a scholarship for acting in the beginning.
Wow.
Yeah, and then after a few years of really focusing on that, then I did this TV show called Backyard Science that was on the ABC. And a lot of the other kids there were also doing TV shows. It was really part of the whole culture of the school, coming in and out of your studies to do those things. I wanted to dance more. And yeah, it's interesting how that came about. I used to do a dance school on the weekends and do really basic dance. But I decided that, this MacDonald College place is where you take things serious, and I want to take dance more serious. So I started and I transferred my focus over to jazz dance and hip hop and tap. Then I heard all the kids, the really good dancers, they did ballet on the weekends for technique. And I was like, what's technique? I don't even know what that is.
Wow,
I was like,
okay.
yeah, if you're really serious about dance, you got to do ballet.
Yeah.
So then I decided to take ballet up on the weekends.
Wow.
And then...
Wow, you were dedicated, huh?
Yeah, and then the ballet teacher said, I think you should transfer your focus over to the ballet stream where you don't do anything but ballet.
Wow.
And I said, okay.
So
I'll try it.
clearly you have the natural dances.
Yeah, there
physics,
must be.
the physics of dance, that you have. So,
yeah, something about the coordination and I just loved it. I don't know why, but maybe it's the discipline of ballet or the structure of it or how foreign it was to me. I just loved it. And so I started at the age of 15, 16.
Wow.
Yeah,
late.
first
That's
time.
considered late.
Yeah, it's very late to do ballet.
Oh my
and
goodness.
then I focused really intently on that, doing it every other day, 2 hours a day at school plus all day Saturdays.
Woof.
Yeah.
I mean, I have ballet dancer friends. That's not easy. That's disgusting. I mean, I mean, my gosh, my goodness, what it takes to be a ballet dancer, particularly a female ballet dancer. Do you still have your points, by the way?
No, I don't. I left them in Berlin.
Oh.
Yeah.
So how long did you do that for?
The training, so the training lasted until I finished high school, and then I decided, okay, it's clear I want to be a dancer now.
Yeah.
Like, I just did that. I learned how to do ballet so intensely, so fast, but yet so late. But there was still something in me that's like, I know I'm not a ballet dancer, but I love the form. And when I perform, I don't want to be limited to that because it's such a specific style, as you probably know. And so we decided, and we as in, I don't know, me and my teachers were like, contemporary dance is the thing for you. And so then I pursued that. Yeah, so I finished high school.
That's very good. That's good advice for them. But so I understand that you wouldn't have wanted the rigidity of just one genre or style of dance, particularly, and what it takes to really just throw all yourself into ballet. I mean, you went through the intense training, but what I don't find, why I'm really excited about this, Sophia, is because I am going to photograph you as but not just as a dancer, but specifically because that is one dance genre that hasn't been diversified as much as it should.
Yeah.
And that's what Misty
Copeland.
She's really put that into focus. But I photographed a ballet dancer, a young ballet dancer, Fijian, half white, half Fijian, but she looks Fijian, and it was amazing, and the reaction to that. And I've been looking, and I can't find people of color ballet dancers, and so I do. Now we're going to touch on that later about what that means for the core of a dance troupe, of a dance company, because the aesthetics, what we know about what the core needs to be, rather they cannot detract from the main thing or the main focus on it. So that's something perhaps we'll touch on a bit later. Continue with telling me about your trajectory and your path about this. So you went straight into contemporary from that after high school?
Yeah, I did, but at the same time there was a few commercial jobs in the mix there.
Right.
So there was a choreographer that came to my high school and auditioned some of the dancers for overseas.
By the way, everyone's going to be Googling. I'm going to be Googling Sophia, ads, blah, 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 and all this backyard science,
Oh my God, you probably find the backyard science stuff up there somewhere,
So the choreographer.
Just a side note to that, with my partner now, he actually was my first boyfriend from when I was 14.
Oh my goodness, that you had said that again. I was like, okay, I need to know when was the first that this is again. Okay,
so
my
it was
goodness.
about the time I was doing backyard science.
Oh my gosh.
And then he has a younger sister who you've now met, Nancy. And I remember going over to their house for the first time, and she was like, oh yeah, you're on backyard science, aren't you? But I was so, I don't know, pubescent and embarrassed. And I just said, no, I'm not on it. I completely denied that I was even on that TV show. And so now, what is it, like 20 years later or so, that I'm, with Hilton and back in the family circuit. And she's like, I know you were lying. I knew all along you were lying. You're obviously in that TV show.
Yeah, but also what a fantastic TV show to be a part of.
Yeah.
So, at this stage also, because you've mentioned Hilton's name, I know Hilton because I was a big fan of So You Think You Can Dance.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh my gosh, that's who he is. After we, we'd gone to Fiji, and I was thinking about, we had just met, right, that time.
Yeah.
So, like, oh my God, Hilton!
Really
But
cool.
I would never have put Hilton and Hilton's sister Nancy, who is a star in her own right as well. What a wonderful, how wonderful, all of you. And going back to you met Hilton.
Yeah,
then.
and sorry, that came out of you wanting me to kind of step through my trajectory a bit. So once I was kind of finishing up at high school, a choreographer actually auditioned dancers at the school to do an overseas trip to India.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I got selected for that. So the first year out of high school, I was actually doing these commercial jobs in India.
Wow.
Yeah, and I loved it. I really loved it. I loved touring. I loved
so you're doing what, 17, 18?
Yeah, 17, 18.
Right.
Yeah, and we did some New Year's Eve shows, and we also toured around a little bit. Yeah.
How fantastic.
Yeah, it was amazing. It really was. But I actually decided from that, it was very clear. I was like, I love this kind of dancing for entertainment. But at the same time, I've been working to be this virtuosic dancer now for the last few years. Been doing ballet and doing really technical things.
Yeah.
And I want to keep pursuing that.
Right.
And so the commercial side of things, if I kept doing it, I knew
I
it wouldn't lead me there.
Absolutely.
And I needed further training. So then I decided to do full-time. So I finished the rest of that year at a full-time school called Brent Street Studios.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, and then I went over to Western Australia where I went to Whopper.
Right, yes.
Yeah, for 3 years, and then I got my degree there.
And so how was that?
That was a real wake-up call. Yeah.
Let's go back to Brent Street before we go to Whopper, because now that sounds interesting, the wake-up call. So how was Brent Street for you? I mean, that's the Fijian ballet dancer I just told the story about. That's where she went.
Oh,
so that's
right.
how,
Oh, amazing.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Brent Street was then, so for a really long time, has been a very well-known dance school. And their focus back then was more commercial dance, but they had just started a full-time school that addressed contemporary dance and ballet.
Right.
So it was kind of like the pilot. They were running that course for the first time, and so everything wasn't as established as the other course and didn't get the same focus and attention.
Right.
And so while I loved it, I needed more, I think, out of my training. And at the time, the teachers were also telling me, you're not really ready to go straight into being a professional, you need more training. So it's coming from both sides.
Right.
And that's when I was encouraged to audition for WAPA and VCA in Australia.
Right.
And they were actually my backup choices because I wanted to go to Alvin Ailey in New York, which
Right.
is like it's a contemporary dance school and dance company specifically for like African heritage people.
Right.
I really thought like that was my tribe. That's where I was going to
Right.
go.
Yes.
But it was also very expensive to even imagine the flights, let alone the tuition, which was over 20 grand a year. And so
Right.
that ended up being more of a dream. And my backup plans became what happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, going back to what you said, now what is that? I mean, just explain it for us, not the technical side of it. What does that mean that you're not ready to be professional? What does it require for a dancer to be ready to be on that professional stage?
Yeah.
What is it that...
Well, at that time, I didn't know. I was like, I'm ready.
Yeah.
And then when I went to... Well, that's why WAPA was such a wake-up call. Because WAPA is 3 years to get your degree. And I'd just done 1 year of full-time.
Right.
And I was like, I'm ready.
Right.
But I guess what is it? I think that your body needs to be strong enough to handle full-time dance work. And I think I've always done really well as a performer, and that my body can definitely achieve technique and do technical shapes. But being taller and being later introduced to ballet meant that that kind of foundational strength wasn't really there. So I could pull things off, but I was often injured, and and I just don't think I was ready. Like my body just took a little longer to get there.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So, and I guess because you started late, and I don't know, I'm just going by myth, urban myth, but dances tend to be shorter. I mean, you've already said it, so do you think that the starting later didn't stop your body from growing, I guess, because you know,
that could be
because the muscles perhaps needed to be denser in order to be the dancer to require the foundation that you've just talked about.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing, which I think it makes you very gives you more versatility. I feel your body, as not being confined to what the training at that time was during growth, which is a very, very off topic, and we've digressed. So let's go back to this shock at WAPA. So what happened there? What did you do? How did it?
Yeah, so WAPA was moving to Perth for one, and so living in the city of Sydney, I felt like it was very happening and fast paced and busy, and all my friends that I went to school with are other performing artists. So one of my best friends was on Home and Away, and another one was a singer and being played on Triple J Hottest 100.
Wow, right.
So I was like in that world.
Yeah, sure.
So going to Perth, which is back then it was a lot quieter.
Yes.
And starting again, basically, I felt confronted by that for one.
So what made you do it? So obviously that requires real dedication to your art.
Yeah.
What did you see yourself doing? So let's go back to that, Sophia, that time frame. We'll go back to, I want to hear about your experience as a WAPA, but what is it that you were wanting to do, that you were willing to give all that up to move across the country to a place you did not know? What was it?
Yeah, I think that WAPA had a great reputation, and a lot of once I started to do my research about where dancers go, a lot of the dancers...
Not so much about WAPA. Sorry to...
sorry.
You. What made you go, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I have to go there to do it because this is where it's going to get me where I need to go. I mean, maybe did it ever cross your mind? Well, no, I'll learn on the job, and I want to stay in Sydney in my comfort zone around my people. And maybe you could have utilized your acting skills and your dance skills, and you could have gone a completely different mainstream genre, but you deliberately pulled yourself out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm asking. What made you go, I'm pulling myself out?
Oh, because I'm a traveler at heart. So displacing myself doesn't faze me as much as maybe it does other people.
Right.
I really, I went to India when I was 17 and I was performing on stage, and that was a thrill. And I had no qualms about being away from my family and friends.
Yeah.
So moving to WAPA, moving to Perth seemed like an okay thing to do, and really, once I started ballet, there was no other option for me but dance. None. I'm so focused, single-minded focused. There's no, oh, I could be, I don't know, I could work in a restaurant, or I could become a historian, or I could do nothing. Just dance. Literally no other option. And that, there's a lot of pressure with that, but it just made my whole 20s very clear. I didn't deliberate too much. It was just dance. And so those two things really helped me just be able to move away. Yeah.
Okay. Well, just another something that came to my mind, because you both you have acting and dancing in you, but you're more dance. That's where your heart is. But acting seems to me you have to be able to have complete detachment from yourself to be able to inhabit another character, right? But that means you need to have this grounding of being able to be in one place. Whereas dancers seem to be nomadic anyway.
Yeah.
No, regardless of, so for you, it's growing up and you being you're a traveler, as you have described yourself, but that could be also genetic for you, as coming from intergenerational. But as a dancer, the dancers I know are all willing to just live out of bag and go, pack up and go.
Yeah.
And it's almost like dancers need to not have that attachment to self. You've got to use your body, and so therefore you can't allow it to settle almost.
Yeah.
So
that's a really interesting theory. I do think you're right. I think there's something in dancers and in dance where your home is your body and you carry it around with you, and that you're often, dancers are attached to family and attached to place, and maybe they don't choose to continue dancing because of that.
Right.
But the ones that have longevity are the ones that just go off.
Yeah, because that home is there, and you cannot be detached from yourself. A dancer cannot be detached from themselves.
Yeah.
Whereas an actor has to, in order to become something and someone else.
Yeah.
Where a dancer has to use your own self.
Yeah.
You cannot be detached. You've got to know completely what your little toe is doing.
Yeah.
In place of exactly where you are. So maybe that's that ability to just not be attached to where you are.
Yeah.
You don't need that. So that's an interesting thing, because for both of you, being both of that. But okay, so let's go back to WAPA.
Yeah.
So how was it? What did you do? What did you have to do? And
so
what does
WAPA
it
was
require?
really intense, and because it's a degree, there's also a theory element to it.
Right.
And so you're in the studio from 9 a.m. in the morning till 6 p.m. at night, Monday to Friday. It's very intense.
Wow.
Yeah. And then if you're needed to rehearse other people's choreographies, then you can do it outside of those hours as well. I went there thinking, because I thought I was ready. So I went there thinking I'll just do the first year and then I'll leave. And that's what I mean why WAPA was such a wake-up call. Because we went right back to the foundations and everything really slowed down. So I'd been dancing at maybe a higher level before getting there, but like I said, I'd missed out on a lot of foundational things. And so they keep you in that foundational space for the first 2 years.
Wow. Great.
And then the third year is where everything kind of really accelerates,
Right.
and you're expected to do
Right.
more.
So throw you in the deep end after sort of really teaching you the basics
Yeah.
and foundations, core out.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's why it's
And-
3 years. I'm going to say 3 years only, but that's Monday to Friday, 9 to 6, intensity. So you
Yeah.
can't do much more than that.
Yeah. And so, as a dancer, the way that you train is you're taking dance classes. And so when you do full-time school, you're just doing a whole lot of classes. But what was really amazing about WAPA is that 3 times in the year, you're working towards a performance season.
Wow.
Which means you have a choreographer from the industry
Right.
coming to the school to lead you through a choreographic process like you would do in the industry,
Right.
and then have a performance season like you would do in the industry of 5 shows over a week. And so that is the gold mine that is WAPA, because that prepared me for a working life.
Yeah, this is fantastic, and the reason why I'm really pushing this conversation is that anyone watching and parents who've got children who want to pursue this, I think it's really important, because dancing and all that is still seen by certain multicultural communities as just being, well, look, it's not really a real job, but the intensity of what it requires to really prove that it is a real thing. And I just think that it's really this is a really good conversation to have for people listening. Like this is what you have to go through, and unlike the other, say, degrees and the things you go to university to study for, you don't get the hands-on experience really until like midway through of a 7-year degree.
Yeah.
You know, whereas this is throwing you in the industry in a condensed version of it straight away. So that sounds really amazing.
Yeah.
So sorry, continue. So you have the choreographers coming in.
Yeah. And it was so amazing, and what it did also is give you that industry contact. So so at least 2 of the choreographers that I worked with during my time at Whopper at university, I then worked with as a professional dancer once I got into my career.
Right.
Yeah, and so it really does set you up really well for a long career, which is what I was looking for. Yeah. Like I explained to you before, I really wanted to get more out of my dance. It's just that before going there, I didn't realize that's what I needed until I got there. And then when I was about to graduate, didn't want to leave.
Oh.
I loved it so much. It was the structure that I needed. And I couldn't imagine what I was going to do without that course there. But, ended up finding my way.
And so what happened after that? From then to now, where have you been? You've been in Berlin, you've been, traveling all over the place. So what else have you...
So I moved back to Sydney, and I had a year there where I was really, I had my side jobs. I was working in retail, I worked in a factory, still trying to take class and audition. And that year then set me up for about 5 years of being an independent freelancer in Sydney. I worked for a lot of independent choreographers, as well as for a company called Sean Parker and Company. Right. And I did a lot of touring with him through 3 productions. We did one called Trolleys, one called Happy as Larry, and another called Am I? Right. And that allowed me to tour to Malaysia and to Europe and all around Australia. We did a national tour and a regional tour of Australia.
And so there is an industry and there is room for dancers. I mean, we have creativity galore, but Australia sometimes seems so small still for such a huge country.
Yeah.
Why aren't our industries bigger? It's crazy that we don't have something like Broadway here, where there's constantly something, in season, constantly something on stage, and constantly something to go to. It's not quite that way. There's always the ballet company. I was talking about they have 2 features a year or something maybe. But there needs to be a constant stream. So how is it from a professional dancer's point of view, the industry? I'm sure you've seen it go from this is really hard. There's only one place for like 1,000 dancers. To is there been improvement in that? Or?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think because after that time, that 5 years of being a freelancer here, then I moved to Berlin and did it there for 5 years. So I have that ability to compare. Right. Like, ask those questions like what is going on here and why is it so different to over there. And first thing that I came up with is that Australia can't escape the vastness and the space that it exists in. So there are industries, but they're small and they're far apart from each other, and they don't cross-pollinate as easily as Europe.
We have licenses per each state instead of just one license that says that this person lives in New South Wales kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you're right.
And then so with that space comes time. It takes longer. It takes longer to get from A to B, but it takes longer for things to be birthed and to fall away, and the ebb and flow of things is longer. So whereas in Berlin, I didn't know a month ahead. Well, let's say I knew my schedule a month in advance, but nothing more. Then when I moved back to Australia, I was being booked for things a year in advance. That's how far ahead, how long term the planning is, and how where a year beforehand trying to make something happen a year from now. But back in Berlin, it was just right. So the speed is different, right? Because I think the landscape is different, and I also think that the weather is different. So people are outside having fun playing sports, and spending their money out there, not inside in a theatre or inside watching things.
Right. Why did you decide to go to Berlin?
Good question. So I got to the point where I felt like I'd hit the edge of the pool in Sydney.
Right.
I'd worked with a lot of the choreographers that were in Sydney at the same time as the ones that I hadn't. We'd probably already tried it out, or I knew it wasn't a fit.
Mm-hmm.
So I could either move to Melbourne or move to Europe.
Why Melbourne?
Because Melbourne's the other city that's, you know, more or less the same size as Sydney,
Yeah.
and it also has its own scene
Yeah.
with its own group of choreographers
Yeah.
that I hadn't worked for yet. Bar
Right,
one,
of course,
bar,
sure. Right,
yeah,
wow.
Bar Melanie Lane.
Right,
And so Melanie Lane was one of the choreographers that worked with me at uni,
right.
and she worked between Melbourne and Berlin, and I did a show with her in Melbourne, so that connection came back from university, and getting to know her a little bit more in this amazing life she lived for over 10 years back and forth from Berlin. I was like, what's this place? And so I dreamt about Europe. I knew she was in Berlin and was a really great person to be in contact with, and she started to, you know, operate really as my mentor once I decided that I wanted to go over there. And with Sean Parker and Company, I had a tour to Europe at the end of 2015, and I used that tour as my like trip overseas, and I just extended the return trip so I could stay there and work everything out.
Right.
And I did a lot of workshops in different cities to get a sense of the scene.
Wow.
And the sense of the city. So I was
Wow.
in Barcelona, London,
Wow.
Brussels,
Wow.
and Berlin. I spent quite a lot of time.
I mean, I'm sorry, Sophia, it's a cliche, but how exciting, and this young
Yeah.
dancer traveling all over and dancing all over. When I say it's a cliche, it's like what we see in a movie or something, right? We want to see,
Yeah.
we want to see our lead young dancer. She's all over in these
Yeah,
countries
yeah.
and places. How wonderful!
Yeah, it was really exciting.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really exciting to kind of self-govern that whole thing.
Yeah,
Like,
wow.
I chose where I wanted to go, and I looked at what dancers and choreographers I was interested in, and just found my way. So
Is there geographical differences in feel of dance and style and taste, like Barcelona versus London? I mean, of course, I mean, you know, you have Spain, and it's the duende, right? The intensity of their flamenco, and but not just in flamenco, in everything they do. So does it come through in contemporary dance as well?
yeah.
I mean, contemporary is a
yeah.
certain style, right? It's
Yeah.
you have to almost be reserved, yet there's some other sort of total uninhibition, a
Yeah.
lack of inhibition.
Yeah.
But there's also a restraint.
Yeah.
I see that the shell is restrained, but it's almost, I don't know what
Yeah.
you all do.
Yeah.
You know, so sorry. So is that the
Yeah,
difference?
it's an interesting observation. I think that within the dancers themselves, like, you can tell a dancer from Greece, you can tell a dancer from the Nordic countries, you can tell. But when it comes to the kind of work and the choreographers and the companies, because Europe cross-pollinates so easily, the style of the actual city doesn't influence the making so much, because you've got a Spanish choreographer who's a director of a company in Germany,
Right.
and you've got an Italian choreographer who's a director of a company in Sweden. So those styles, it doesn't necessarily correlate to how you say, but I think in the bodies themselves and the histories of the bodies, definitely.
Right.
Yeah.
So there seems to be, if not diversity in visual diversity, there seems to be what should we call it? A lack of segregation in how, like you're saying, the Spanish, choreographer, Spanish director of a company and of a, like that. So
Yeah.
a real cross pollination, you've called it. Now,
Yeah.
can we just go back then? Let's talk about you and your racial identity, your biracial identity. So, please,
Yeah.
can you talk about that?
Talk about, I mean, in terms of, like, there's a whole life lived, I guess. I don't know really where to start.
How
Growing
does
up
it
was-
influence? Let's start from this angle, the dance angle. Where does it influence you? Because naturally, you'd have that half of you is connected to an entire continent and the continent's countries, and it's you are Zulu, half Zulu.
Yeah.
Well, you are Zulu, not half Zulu. Sorry, but
Yeah.
I mean, how does it come through in your expression?
Yeah. Well, sometimes I think that the innate dancer in me is absolutely that side,
Right.
which is my dad's side.
Right.
But being, half Zulu and being genetically half Zulu, but then comparing that to my lived experience, which was not a lot in South Africa, wasn't at all really, and I've only been there once.
Right.
And so how that plays into my identity is ever evolving, and also because my dad passed away when I was younger, and before that my parents separated.
Right.
So in terms of having cultural influence from South Africa and having the lineage passed down from him to me, that side is largely like missing and yet to be kind of explored and lived and filled in.
Right.
And so when I take myself into the world as a biracial person, it means not what maybe people assume, you know. It means just what it means to me, which is that I carry it in my bones, and I carry it in my in the things that are inherent and inherited, but not necessarily something that I've learnt.
Right.
Yeah.
So that pertains to, like, if someone reads your bio in half Zulu, Sophia Ndaba, would they, do they go with this preconception, well, I'm going to be seeing something that has been inspired by Sophia's lineage or ancestry? But I think that's a great disservice to you as Sophia Ndaba, the choreographer and dancer, yes? Because you're not just confined to your racial identity.
Yeah, and I think we live in a world, that's such a big question, actually, or a big topic to talk about, because I can't actually be responsible for what people interpret from, the words that I say about myself. But I should try and be as clear as possible. And when you are dealing with people who have either been displaced from a certain part of themselves for various reasons, but still want to hold respect for that and articulate that with language, that's one thing, and that's more where I'm coming from. So when I say Zulu Australian, I'm not talking to necessarily like the culture and the lived experience, but I'm talking to a part of my identity that deserves to be on the same plate as living and grown up in Australia.
Yeah.
And then also that we live in a world where your cultural identity is important, and it's important because Africans have been displaced, and through colonization a lot of people's identity has been fractured and forgotten, and so those words are important to keep it alive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, even though I don't have that lived experience. So when I introduce myself as a Zulu Australian, I want the world to know that that is a part of me, that regardless of how much day-to-day life I spent living as a Zulu in Africa, I'm proud, and that I go by this. Yeah.
Speaking of all of that identity, which comes to the fore because of what has happened to the world because of colonization. Now let's talk about colonization in Australia and its ongoing residue and the actual reality of it. So, do dancers who are people of color, or who identify as people of color, do they get the same opportunities in this country, which is still very reliant on optics? And for instance, when I watched the Newbury 2022, I did. Part of me was uncomfortable with not seeing a true population representation on that stage. And then the practical side of me went, well, aesthetically, it may not go. And that's a huge problem that I had to confront within myself. Like, what am I saying? Am I saying it's okay? Or did I want to see all shades? I want to see all shades of skin color on that, so that there's a graduating thing. Now, this is a conversation, or that's a completely different topic. So perhaps we may not go into it here right now, but from your point as a dancer who now your experience, that's that's 20 years, right? We're talking now. Wow. Of being from the ground up. You've done, and you so coming and traveling all over the world, and going back to Berlin now. Berlin, because I know a little bit of its history, because of Weimar Berlin and what it used to be Weimar Berlin, and and how decadent and how some would say was debauched at that time, because there were no boundaries on what kind of creativity people wanted to do to express themselves. And I know through all of that through because no one really looks at Germany and goes, yeah, that's the hub of creativity and boundary-free expression.
Yeah.
But Berlin and what it used to be, I had learned that from the burlesque industry.
Oh, okay.
Because I ran the Australian burlesque calendar.
Yeah.
And
wow.
I'm not a burlesque performer. I do not have that mentality or personality to want to be that, but I enjoyed it. And there was no cohesion, no structure. Everyone was just, so I said, look, let me get this going for you, and let's help each other. So that's how.
Yeah.
And that's when I got to, because I would photograph all the shows, and a lot of true performers were very influenced by Berlin.
Yeah.
And that thing. So that's how I knew about it. So going from Berlin, which is just a huge hub of this, what was it? Tell me more about that before we continue coming back down into Australia.
Yeah, because it is very diverse there, and people have moved from all around the world to live in Berlin, and it's, even the dance there and the focus on diversity, but not like something that they have to achieve.
Yeah.
It's something that they naturally are.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That is absolutely beautiful way to say it. 'Cause that's what I think the problem with Australia is right now.
Yeah.
When I said optics, we tick the boxes to try and achieve this idea of diversity, but it's not really coming through, because they think, well, we've got this, so we've ticked those boxes, so we don't have to do anything else.
Yeah.
So going back to Berlin, because I really want to touch on the topic of how it's unsettling and disconcerting for me as a person of color to sit in this audience and not actually see the representation visually, but I understand aesthetically.
Yeah.
Have I been conditioned to believe that contemporary dance in particular, and also a core, like a ballet core, right? The core.
Yeah.
I mean, if you see people of color in that, does it then defeat the purpose of the core?
Yeah, I don't.
This is a really something. It's
it
either.
Could. But when I say it could, I'm trying to trace back to the reasons why people, because so the core, it's about what people look like, but more about what the bodies achieve.
Right.
And what the bodies achieve has to look very similar.
Yeah, that's right.
So you have to have a similar training to each other.
Yeah.
And that is largely grounded in those traditional forms like ballet,
Right.
that were exclusive to people or families that maybe came from a higher income.
Yeah.
Like I said, I went to McDonald College on a scholarship.
Yeah.
There's no way I could afford to go to that school in any other terms. So if the training to become the dancer that is in those companies, like City Dance Company, is expensive and exclusive to a certain extent, that stops a certain type of person being able to do it.
So that starts from way back there. So the platforms don't really have, but they do have I feel, a sense of duty to change that.
Yes.
Particularly now, with how multicultural Australia really is.
Yes.
20 years from now, these children want to see that representation, so it'll be up to these companies to make sure. So I feel that maybe they need to start that, because you're right, it starts from there, from the bottom.
Yeah, and I think it starts, therefore, from the schools and the training institutions breaking down that exclusion, so it doesn't exist. So then that opens up the gates for all different kinds of dancers to be trained in the way that they need to be trained in order to get those positions.
Right.
But I can't speak for companies like City Dance Company or for any other institution in terms of how they're going to select based on diversity.
Right.
But I do understand how the cohesion of a core and where that comes from is based in training and what the bodies are able to do.
Yep. Absolutely.
And then that just gives me energy to be like, well, as a choreographer, and stepping into a different role now where I'm looking for dancers, I have the ability to choose.
Wow.
And I have the ability to open that gate and to... I'm excited by diversity.
Yeah.
I actually think it makes the work better.
Absolutely.
It makes it so much better for the kind of work that I want to make.
Yeah.
Having individuals that are diverse in their cultural background, but also in their experience as humans and in their experience as dancers. That just adds way more to the palette of whatever work is going to be put on. So, yeah, I can't speak on behalf of others, but in terms of where I want to go and what I want to do, and what I've seen, you know, because in Berlin it was really like walking into a room with just people from different worlds. What you can create together is just unimaginable.
So let's talk about the imaginable. What are you going for? What's happening now? What are your projects that are coming up? What are you doing? If you are happy to share with us the things you'd like to do, what would you like to do?
Yeah, well, I would love to keep choreographing. That's really clear to me.
So is that your love now rather than the performance?
Oh, I'm in a crisis with that because I still love performing.
Of course.
And you know, being a professional dancer, you have to be so much in your body and so much in the practice of dancing that I'm learning how choreography takes you out of that.
Oh.
Yeah, because you're spending a lot of time formulating your ideas, talking with collaborators, writing grant applications. When you're in the studio, you're not dancing the dance as much as you are directing the room.
Right, yeah.
So
sure.
I'm a bit in a crisis about what comes first. But I have energy behind me to keep choreographing, and so this year we'll go with that. And I'm making a dance film, which is really awesome, and so we're going to develop that at the end of February, and let's see how that goes. So that's going to be like a 10-minute dance film, and it will be on an ensemble of dancers, and the concept for that is actually based on this psychological phenomenon called groupthink. Which is cool that we talk about it now because we've just come from talking about diversity. And so what groupthink is this strange thing that humans do across the board, that in a collective they give up their individual ideals, ideas and values to merge with the group, to be safe inside the group. So they're trying not to stand out for whatever reason. And you know, that's happened on a global scale in many ways. But also people find it in the workplace. They gravitate towards a common way of operating, and they give up a lot of what is inherent and unique within themselves. And so as a choreographer, I just like immediately think of visual images and the physicality around that, and what happens when we suppress all of that individuality. There's a dark side to it. But you know, in order to explore that, you need to present the opposite of that as well. So my team of dancers is incredibly diverse, and I'm really looking forward to getting in the studio and seeing what comes up.
Oh my goodness, we're looking forward to seeing what you're coming up with. It's so exciting, and it's a huge responsibility. And you are to me, it seems, you are on the wave of change. That is, it's you know, that wave is now it's rolling. It's in this. Gosh, the surfers listening to this going, lady, come on, say the terms, the barrel, the crest, the whatever. So it's exciting, and will you stay here? Will you stay in Australia? Will that nomadic dancing, you want to take this and be out there, absorbing and giving back and contributing to the global, the new way of group thing? Because it seems to me what you've said, that art seems to be the only place where the groupthink is a positive thing.
As in that coming together under the...
Yeah, and then being able to, putting it like in the core, like in your piece, you know, all these dancers, and that groupthink, you know, that you're all moving as one, individuals moving as one to create this beautiful big picture.
Yeah,
and so...
Yeah, that's a connection that I think is really important to say, is that moving as one is incredibly important, and we see that, you know, in military, and we see that like across the board, that like, you know, humans working together as a group is extremely powerful. And dance does that really well, and dancing in unison, big groups of
don't
people
we just
dance,
love it?
We love to see that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's so great to acknowledge that, because, you know, there's also a dark side to that. So looking at these two Yeah.
Ooh, and
It's
so we're gonna leave it there because that sounds like a really exciting thing to look forward to. Thank you so much for this conversation,
My pleasure.
and I'm really excited about seeing what you do. I'm gonna watch, see what you do. I can't wait to see all the wonderful things you come up with. Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Sorry. This evolution as a choreographer now. You're a choreographer dancer. Will you stay here?
I see myself as an international artist, but home is very much in Australia. And there are plans to go back to Europe this year for a time. And I think it will always be a part of my journey to be travelling. We talked about how that's very easy for someone like me to just kind of up and go. But since the pandemic, I've really put down roots here in Australia, and it feels right, and it feels like a place that I'll always be coming back to.
Right.